Today, I'm going to continue reading the Word of the Buddha. Okay, so we left off with the Four Noble Truths. This is, again, a little book that kind of gives you um, everything is kind of condensed down into basically from the words of the Buddha, the essentials of the the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so today we are picking up with the Four Noble Truths, and I'm just going to read and maybe stop, pause a couple times and discuss it. And when I hit somewhere close to 5 minutes in this video, I'm going to start looking for a stopping point. So I don't know how far we're going to get. Thus has it been said by the Buddha, the enlightened one, it is through not understanding, not realizing four things that I, disciples as well as you, had to wander so long through this round of rebirths. And what are these four things? They are the noble truth of suffering. And the word for suffering there, it has a notation that it's dukkha. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but dukkha. The noble truth of the origin of suffering. The noble truth of the extinction of suffering. And the noble truth of the path that leads to the extinction of suffering. As long as the absolutely true knowledge and insight as regards these four noble truths was not quite clear in me, so long was I not sure that I had won that supreme enlightenment which is unsurpassed in all the world, with its heavenly beings, evil spirits and gods, amongst all the hosts of ascetics and priests, heavenly beings and men. But as soon as the absolute true knowledge and insight as regards these four noble truths had become perfectly clear in me, there arose in me the assurance that I had won that supreme enlightenment unsurpassed. And I discovered that profound truth, so difficult to perceive, difficult to understand, tranquilizing and sublime, which is not to be gained by mere reasoning, and is visible only to the wise. The world, however, is given to pleasure, delighted with pleasure, enchanted with pleasure. Truly such beings will hardly understand the law of conditionality, the dependent origination of everything incomprehensible to them will also be the end of all formations. I actually combined the wrong things. There was actually a little semicolon there. So let's, truly such beings will hardly understand the law of conditionality, the dependent origination of everything. And that should have been like a sentence. Incomprehensible to them will also be the end of all formations, the forsaking of every substratum of rebirth, the fading away of craving, detachment, extinction, nibbana. Yet there are beings whose eyes are only a little covered with dust. They will understand the truth. And I think the most important aspect of what we see here is, and I discovered that profound truth so difficult to perceive, difficult to understand, tranquilizing and sublime, which is not to be gained by mere reasoning, and is visible only to the wise. So when we learn the Four Noble Truths, and I think this is the essence of what we're getting at here, is the Four Noble Truths, simply by learning them logically and just reasoning, is not enough for enlightenment. So there has to be a practice, and it talks about how without the practice, people who are immersed in their pleasures and attachments and things that they cling to cannot comprehend this. Okay, so um, one of the things that we have to try to do is to actually put it into practice and not just think that we can just reason our ways to it. As we put into practice and we start with the 5 precepts, and we deepen that with the practice of the Eightfold Path, as we put things into practice, comprehension it begins to open up. And it's really hard to explain. It's very subtle, but those who actually practice this path understand why that's true. It's just not something you can logically explain. Okay, and I'm not at enlightenment. I'm nowhere near it. But I have been practicing enough of the Eightfold Path to have seen how practicing the Eightfold Path actually does affect your ability to see the truth more deeply. And when you, like, let's say, when I was in my early 20s, and my vision was very cloudy, and I can see the difference between then and now. And it's not easy to talk about, like, there's no words that describe that concept. So there is no logical discourse that you could just read a book and then boom, enlightenment happens. We have to practice the Noble Eightfold Path. We have to put it into practice. We have to gain control of the mental faculties and have self-restraint. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to have self-restraint, and that's why it's the middle path. It's not, we don't immerse ourselves into pleasures. We don't just, do whatever we want whenever we want. If it feels good, just do it. But at the same time, you don't completely reject all pleasures either. You don't go out and try to force pain upon yourself and go to the extreme asceticism of starving yourself half to death in order to avoid pleasure either. You just recognize that something feels good or something feels uncomfortable, but you don't. You try to get yourself away from the being engrossed into the pleasure and get yourself into that middle ground where you can take it or leave it. Okay, you have your pleasure when you have it, and then once it's gone away and you're not experiencing the pleasure, it's not a big deal. You don't have to continuously seek out that pleasure. That's what addiction really is once the pleasure goes away, you're immediately seeking out that pleasure again. So I think that's a good stopping point. We're going to still be in the Four Noble Truths next time, but now the book gets into detail and starts with the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. So in the next video, I'll be reading from the first noble truth.